My girlfriend uploaded a photo with another guy captioned, "This is what real happiness looks like, red heart," while we were still together. I didn't react. Months later, she deleted everything after people started tagging me and asking questions she couldn't answer. "This is what real happiness looks like." That was the caption. And the photo? Her, laughing, arms loosely wrapped around some guy I had never seen before in my life. Posted publicly at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, while I was still her boyfriend. I remember the exact moment I saw it. I was sitting at my desk, half asleep, finishing up some work, an open energy drink going flat beside my keyboard, when my phone lit up with a notification. One of our mutual friends had tagged me in the comments. Not to warn me, not to check on me, not to whisper anything into my ear first. Just tagged me, like it was nothing. Like they hadn't just walked up to me in the middle of a quiet street and dropped a lit grenade at my feet. I stared at that screen. I stared at her face in that photo. I stared at the way she was standing. I stared at the guy beside her, tall, dark jacket, head tilted toward hers like he was sharing a secret. And I felt something move through my body that I didn't have a name for yet. Then I did something that surprised even me. I put my phone face down on the desk, turned back to my laptop, and finished my work. Not because I wasn't affected, not because I didn't care, but because something in me went very, very still. And that stillness was the beginning of something she never saw coming. What I didn't know in that moment, what I couldn't have known, was that my silence was the one variable she hadn't planned for. She had planned for anger. She had planned for a confrontation. She had probably planned for tears, accusations, the kind of explosive scene that ends relationships in one loud evening and gets cleaned up before morning. She had not planned for a man who saw everything, said nothing, and started watching. And that difference between the scene she expected and the silence she got would unravel everything over the following months. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 26. She was 24. We had been together 2 years and 3 months. Her name was Celeste. And up until that Tuesday night in September, I genuinely believed we were okay. Not extraordinary. Not the kind of couple people watched and envied. But real. Stable. Something worth keeping. Or at least that's the story I had been telling myself. Let me back up. Because the photo didn't come from nowhere, and I'd be lying if I said the weeks and months before it were perfectly normal. They weren't. I just didn't want to see what I was seeing. And there's a particular kind of blindness that love manufactures. Not innocence, not stupidity, just the refusal to accept an answer you aren't ready for. I was living in that blindness for months. And I think, on some level, I knew it. Celeste was the kind of person who filled a room without effort. I met her at a house party 2 years earlier, through a mutual friend named Owen. Owen had pulled me aside just before introducing us and said, quietly, almost under his breath, "She's a lot. Just so you know." I laughed. I thought he was being dramatic. Owen was the kind of guy who said things like that about every interesting woman, so I filed it away as background noise and walked over to introduce myself. She was standing near the back wall of the apartment, holding a drink she wasn't really touching, half listening to a conversation happening next to her while her eyes moved around the room with this restless, searching energy. She noticed me before I said anything. That was the first thing that got me. Most people don't notice until you speak. She noticed the approach, and she smiled before I even opened my mouth. That was the beginning. The first year was genuinely good. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy, in hindsight, to rewrite the whole thing as a warning sign from the start. It wasn't. The first year was warm and funny and surprisingly deep in the ways that matter. Celeste remembered small things. Not just dates and preferences. She remembered the texture of things. The name of the dog I had growing up, even though I only mentioned him once, offhandedly, in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely. The fact that I had a complicated relationship with my older brother and never liked to talk about it, so she never pushed. The exact way I liked my coffee, 2 sugars, a splash of cold water, so I didn't have to wait to drink it. She remembered all of it. I used to think about that. I used to think that remembering the small things was its own kind of declaration. That paying attention to someone's habits and preferences and quiet vulnerabilities was a form of love that didn't need to announce itself. And maybe I was right. Maybe it was love. Or maybe it was something that looked exactly like love and served a similar purpose, but came from a different place. I've thought about that question more times than I'd like to admit. And the honest answer is that I don't know. I don't know which parts of the first year were real and which parts were performance. And maybe that's the cruelest part of all. Not that she stopped loving me, but that I'll never know the exact moment the real thing became a habit, and the habit became a role, and the role quietly replaced whatever had been underneath it. I used to lie awake thinking about that. I don't anymore, but I did for a long time. Somewhere in the second year, the temperature dropped. Not suddenly, not in a way I could point to and say, that was the day. It was more like watching summer end, gradual, almost imperceptible, until one morning you reach for a jacket and realize the season already changed while you weren't paying attention. She became busier. New friends, new places, new plans I wasn't part of. I told myself that was normal. People grow. Relationships evolve. You don't have to be in each other's pockets to be solid. I told myself that story for months. And every time I almost stopped believing it, she'd do something sweet. Bring me dinner when I was working late. Send me a voice note just because she was thinking of me, and I'd reset. That's what made it so effective. Not the betrayal. The maintenance of the illusion around it. The first time she mentioned the name Carter, I almost missed it. We were at the kitchen table on a weeknight, eating takeout, half watching something on the laptop between us. She was talking about a restaurant she'd tried, said it was overrated. And then, casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world, she said, Carter thinks so too, actually. I looked up. Carter, yeah, from the photography workshop. He's been going there forever, and he said the same thing. She shrugged. She speared a piece of food with her fork. She did not look at me, and I sat there for a second with a feeling I couldn't quite name. Something small and uncomfortable and specific. And then the conversation moved on, and I let it. That was the first time. It would not be the last. The photography workshop was something Celeste had announced in February. She said she had always wanted to learn to shoot properly. She wanted to develop a creative skill, something just for her. I thought that was genuinely healthy. I supported it without hesitation. In March, for her birthday, I found a secondhand film camera at a vintage shop across town. It had good glass, a solid body, a few quirks she'd have to learn. When she unwrapped it, she went completely quiet for a moment. Then she cried. She said it was the most thoughtful gift anyone had ever given her. She held it against her chest like it was something fragile. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching her and thought, this is what love looks like. 2 weeks later, she was at a workshop every Saturday, then Saturdays and Wednesdays, then sometimes Sunday afternoons. I didn't say anything. I just noticed. Over the next 2 months, Carter's name appeared exactly 3 more times. Never at length. Never in a way I could pin down as significant. Just dropped in. A comment here. A comparison there. A Carter mentioned something like that tucked into the middle of a longer sentence. And every time it happened, I felt that same small, uncomfortable, specific feeling. Like a splinter under the skin. Invisible from the outside. Unmistakably there. But I didn't confront it. Because confronting it would have required acknowledging what it meant. And I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Here's something I've learned about people who are quietly betraying you. They don't always become more distant. Sometimes they become more present, more tender, more attentive. Because guilt is a strange and restless engine. It makes people overcorrect in the direction of the person they're hurting, as if constant small acts of kindness can balance a growing debt they've never spoken aloud. It's not even always conscious. I don't think Celeste sat down one evening and decided, I'll be warmer this week to compensate for what I've been doing. I think it was more reflexive than that. The way your hand flinches back from a hot surface before you've registered the pain. Guilt fires first, and the behavior follows automatically. Celeste started cooking more. She texted me throughout the day more than she had in months. She laughed at my jokes with more warmth. She reached for my hand in public in a way she had quietly stopped doing sometime in the first half of the year. She asked about my work with more interest than she had shown in weeks. She suggested we watch movies together on weeknights, something she used to say she was too tired for. And every time she did these things, some part of me that was already uneasy got confused again. Because how do you stand in the middle of someone doing everything right and tell yourself something is wrong? You can't. Not without evidence. Not without sounding like the problem in your own relationship. Not without looking like you're manufacturing suspicion out of nothing. Like you're so committed to some internal narrative of disaster that you can't accept kindness when it's sitting right in front of you. So I adjusted. I told myself the warmth was real. I wore the winter inside me like a coat and called it normal. I kept breathing. And I kept watching. The post went up on a Tuesday night in September. But the day itself had been completely ordinary. She woke before me, made coffee, left a mug on my side of the bed the way she always did, kissed me on the forehead before I was fully awake. told me she was going to her friend Petra's place for a creative session. Petra was real. I had met her once at a gallery opening earlier that year, a quiet woman who laughed easily and seemed genuinely kind. I had no reason not to believe Celeste. She left. I got up. I worked. At 9 p.m., she texted me saying she was leaving Petra's. At 9:32 p.m., she texted saying she was grabbing food on the way back. She never came home. I didn't know that yet. I was still at my desk, phone face down, finishing my work. Let me tell you what the photo actually looked like. Because the caption was the weapon, but the photo itself was the confession. It was an outdoor shot, golden hour light, the specific kind you only get in late September when the sun drops low and floods everything in amber. They were standing close, not glaringly close, not in a way that left nothing to interpretation, but close in the quiet way two people are close when they've stopped tracking distance between themselves. He was tall, dark jacket, open at the collar, his head angled slightly down toward hers, like he was in the middle of saying something meant only for her. And she was laughing, not a posed smile, not the expression she used for photos she knew she'd post. A real laugh, full face, eyes crinkled at the corners, head tilted back just slightly. The kind of laugh I hadn't seen from her in months. And that, more than the guy, more than the caption, more than the midnight timestamp, was what settled into my chest and stayed. The laugh. The completely unguarded, completely genuine laugh, directed at someone who wasn't me. I knew immediately what the post was doing. Not every detail, but the shape of the intention. You don't caption a photo, "This is what real happiness looks like," at midnight on a Tuesday, and post it publicly without meaning something by it. You don't use that specific phrase, real happiness, without implying the existence of its opposite. You don't tag a location, choose that image, lean into that light, and select that moment without intention behind every single choice. This was not a thoughtless post. Nothing about it was thoughtless. This was a statement, and it was directed at someone, whether me, whether herself, whether Carter, whether the audience watching. I wasn't completely sure yet, but I knew it wasn't accidental, and I knew it was designed to be seen. She came home at 1 a.m. I was in bed, eyes closed, not sleeping. She moved through the apartment quietly, thinking I was out. She smelled like cold night air and someone else's cologne. Not heavy, not obvious, just there at the edges. A ghost of something that didn't belong in my apartment. She lay down beside me without touching me and fell asleep within minutes. I lay awake until almost 4 in the morning, thinking, deciding, turning the situation over in my mind from every angle. And by the time the sky outside started lightening, I had made a choice. I wasn't going to react. Not visibly. Not yet. I was going to keep watching. Because I had learned, earlier in my life and in ways I won't get into here, that the worst thing you can do when you suspect something is expose your suspicion before you fully understand what you're dealing with. Confront someone too early and they adjust. Become more careful. Cover their tracks. But stay quiet. Genuinely, consistently quiet, and most people will eventually reveal themselves completely. Because they're counting on the reaction. They've already scripted the confrontation in their heads. And when the confrontation never comes, they don't know how to hold the weight of what they've done without somewhere to put it. The next morning she was completely normal. Disturbingly, perfectly normal. She made breakfast. She asked about my week. She mentioned wanting to try a new place for dinner on the weekend. I said sure. I smiled when it felt natural. I answered questions. I was present enough to avoid raising alarm. But inside, I had turned into something very still. The kind of still that isn't peace. The kind of still that's just the absence of sound. That afternoon, on my lunch break, I went back and looked at the post again. The comments had been accumulating all morning. People from her photography circle commenting things like, "You deserve this, babe." And this smile. "I'm crying." And "Look at you glowing, oh my God." And then someone, a university friend of hers named Bex, had left a comment that I read 3 times before I fully understood what I was looking at. It said, "This is so good to see. You've been unhappy for too long. Carter is lucky." Carter. She had used his name. In a public comment. On a post where I had already been tagged by someone else. I sat there with my phone in my hand and breathed slowly for a moment. Then I opened a blank document on my laptop, and I started writing. Dates, names, incidents, tone shifts, location mentions, absences that hadn't added up. All the things I had been passively cataloging in the back of my mind for months, I now wrote down in one place. Not to build a case, not to prepare an accusation, but because I needed to see the complete shape of things before I acted on any of it. And when I looked at what I had written, the full list, in order, beginning to end, the picture it painted was undeniable. This had been happening for months. I want to be honest about what I felt in those days. People expect rage in these stories. They expect the burning, pacing, door-slamming kind of pain that announces itself loudly. I didn't feel that. What I felt was grief. Low and heavy and very quiet. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that just sits in the middle of your chest and breathes slowly, taking up space that nothing else can fill. I had loved Celeste. Not in a desperate or consuming way, but steadily, genuinely, without conditions or performance. And now I was sitting in a half-empty office at lunchtime, writing a list of all the ways she had built a second life beside mine without me ever knowing. And the worst part wasn't the betrayal. The worst part was looking back at the warmth, the coffee on my bedside, the birthday gift tears, the hand-holding in public, and not knowing anymore which of it had been real. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept watching. She posted 2 more photos from what she called workshop sessions. Carter was not visible in either of them, but the location tags told the story. One was taken at a coffee shop I had never heard of on the opposite side of the city. One was taken at an outdoor park 30 minutes from our apartment, a park I had never been to with her. Neither location had anything to do with the studio she had originally mentioned when she first started the workshops. I filed all of it away. I never mentioned any of it. I stayed quiet. Then something started happening online that I hadn't anticipated. Our mutual friend group, slowly, individually, without any coordination, started noticing things. First it was Owen. Owen sent me a text that just said, "Hey, you doing okay?" 2 words, loaded with everything he wasn't saying. I replied, "Yeah, all good." "What?" He said. "No reason. Just checking in." He had seen the post. He was lying about having no reason. But I respected that he wasn't trying to be the one to break it open. I told him we'd grab coffee soon. He said whenever I was ready. Then it was Felix. Felix was a friend from a previous job who had zero patience for subtlety. He texted me within 24 hours of the post going up. "Bro, did you see what Celeste posted? Who is that guy?" I told him I'd seen it. He said, "And you're not. What are you doing? Why are you calm?" I said I was handling it. He went quiet for a second. Then, "You're being way too calm about this." I said, "Probably." He said, "So what are you going to do?" I said, "Nothing yet." He sent back a single question mark and then nothing else. Felix trusted me enough to drop it. That meant a lot. About 3 weeks after the original post, the online situation began to shift in a direction I hadn't fully predicted. People in our extended friend circle, not close friends, but the broader network of people who knew both of us through different channels, started noticing the pattern. It started as a trickle, then it became consistent. Different people, from different pockets of our shared social world, began tagging me in the comments of her posts. Not the original photo, her other posts. Questions like, "Hey, are you still with?" And then my username. Or, "Haven't seen you two together in a while, everything okay?" Or they'd comment on photos she posted at places we used to go together, tagging me to ask if I remembered that spot. It was the internet doing exactly what the internet does. Connecting dots, pulling threads, asking questions out loud that people usually whisper privately. And Celeste was watching it happen in real time. I know she was watching because her behavior at home changed. Not dramatically, but in the small ways. She checked her phone more frequently. She would go quiet in the middle of conversations for a second, then come back and laugh a little too loudly. She became more affectionate in ways that felt like overcorrection, sitting closer to me than necessary, touching my arm while she talked, asking about my day with slightly more intensity than the question warranted. One evening she sat down beside me on the couch, rested her head on my shoulder, and said softly, "I feel like we haven't really talked in a while." I said, "We talk every day." She said, "No, I mean really talked. Like we used to." I looked at her. She had the expression of someone who wants forgiveness before confession. Someone who hopes that enough warmth in the present can outweigh the weight of what they've done in the recent past. I recognized the expression. I said, "What do you want to talk about?" She paused too long, then said, quietly, "Nothing specific. I just miss you." I said, "I'm right here." And then I went back to the book I was reading. She sat there for a minute without saying anything. Then she got up and went to the kitchen. 6 weeks after the original post, Bex, the same Bex who had commented Carter's name out loud in a tagged thread, posted her own photo. A group shot from some outdoor social event. In that photo, standing 2 people to the left of Celeste, was Carter. I knew it was him before anyone confirmed it. I knew because of the way Celeste was positioned relative to him in the group. Not touching, not even looking at him, but angled. The way a body angles towards something it has trained itself not to look at directly. The way a compass needle faces north even when you turn it away. Multiple people tagged me in the comments of that photo. Some I knew well, some I barely knew at all. The questions in the comments were no longer subtle. Is that the same guy from Celeste's post a few weeks ago? Hasn't she been dating? And then my username. Wait, are they even still together? That night, Celeste came home and went straight to her phone. She stood in the kitchen for almost 20 minutes, just scrolling and tapping. I watched from the hallway. She hadn't heard me come in. I could see her jaw tighten. She deleted comments. 1, 2, 3 more. Then she paused, staring at the screen. Then 2 more deletions. Then she stood completely still with the phone in both hands and looked at the wall above the stove. I walked into the kitchen. She startled. Didn't hear you, she said. Sorry, I said. I opened the fridge, poured a glass of water. She watched me with that nervous, over-attentive energy she'd been carrying for weeks. I said, You okay? You look tired. She said, Yeah, just tired. I said, Long day? She said, Yeah. I nodded. I took my water. I went to bed. I let her stand in the kitchen alone with whatever she was carrying. I need to tell you about the conversation I had with Owen. Because Owen, as it turned out, had been holding something for a long time. We met for coffee on a Saturday afternoon. He stirred his cup for a long time without speaking. Then, without looking up, he said, How long have you known? I said, A while. He nodded. Slowly, he said, I kept telling myself maybe I was wrong. That maybe it wasn't what it looked like. I said, What did it look like? He set his spoon down on the saucer. He looked at me directly, and he said, She's been introducing him to people as her boyfriend since at least July. I felt the ground shift under the sentence. Not dramatically, just enough. A flex. The feeling of standing on something solid and realizing it isn't. July. 3 months before the post. 5 months before this conversation. I said the word out loud, quietly. July. He said, I heard it from 3 different people independently. I'm sorry I didn't come to you sooner. I kept thinking you probably already knew, or that maybe it would resolve itself. I told him I understood. I told him I wasn't angry with him. And I meant it, because what he had just given me, that single piece of confirmed, specific information, was the last piece I had been waiting for. July meant this wasn't a recent mistake born of sudden attraction. July meant it was a long, deliberate, parallel life. Months of parallel life. I want to address something directly, because I know it's what people are thinking. Why didn't I leave the moment I knew? Why did I keep watching, keep waiting, keep living inside a situation I had already understood? The answer is harder to articulate than a single reason. Part of it was wanting the full picture before making a permanent decision. Part of it was the quiet, stubborn grief of a person who isn't ready to say goodbye to something they loved, even after they understand it's already gone. But mostly, and this is the part I've thought about most, it was that I needed the decision to come from clarity, not from emotion. Because emotions pass. Rage passes. Hurt passes. Shock passes. And decisions made in the middle of a wave tend to get second-guessed when the wave retreats. I had watched people around me make permanent decisions in the middle of temporary emotional states and spend years wondering if they'd acted right. I had even done it myself once, years earlier, in a different situation I won't get into here. I had learned, from that experience, that the worst outcomes don't come from bad people making bad choices. They come from good people making irreversible decisions before they've fully understood what they're dealing with. So I decided to understand it completely. I decided to let the picture assemble itself, piece by piece, until I could see the whole shape of it without any part still obscured. And then, from that solid ground, with full information, with clear eyes, I would walk. Not storm, not explode. Walk. The way a person who knows exactly where they're going walks. Steadily, without looking back. By mid-November, almost 2 months after the original post, Celeste's comment sections were becoming unmanageable. Every day, new tags, new questions, new people connecting the post to the group photo to the comment to the name. She deleted comments constantly. But deletion only accelerated the problem. People noticed what was being removed, screenshotted before it disappeared, and referenced the deletions as confirmation. The internet is relentless when it gets a scent of something. And it had a scent now. One Thursday evening, she came home and sat down at the kitchen table. Just sat. didn't take off her coat, didn't look at her phone, just sat there with her hands folded in front of her, looking at the surface of the table like it owed her something. I sat across from her. I waited. She said, "I need to tell you something." I said, "Okay." She looked at her hands. She said, I think I've been confused for a while. About a lot of things. About what I want." Silence. She looked up. "I met someone. At the workshop. His name is Carter." More silence. I didn't feel it. She said, "Nothing physical happened." I held her gaze. And calmly, without raising my voice, I said, "That's not true." She blinked. I said it again. "That's not true, Celeste." Her mouth opened slightly. Closed. She looked back down at her hands. She said, very quietly, "How much do you know?" I said, "Enough." A long silence. A heavy one. She started to say something, and I held up one hand, and she stopped. I said, "You've been introducing him as your boyfriend since July." The color left her face. Not gradually. Immediately. She said, "Who told you that?" I said, "It doesn't matter who told me. It matters that it's true." She opened her mouth. Closed it again. She had run out of the architecture of the story she'd been building. The conversation that followed lasted nearly 2 hours. I'm not going to walk you through every minute of it. Some of what was said belongs only to that room. Some of it I've processed enough times by now that the details have softened, the way old photographs do when you handle them too often. But I'll tell you the essential shape of it. She cried. Genuinely, I believe. I don't think she was performing. She said she had been unhappy for months before Carter came along. She said she hadn't known how to bring it up. She said she was afraid of how I would react, afraid I'd get angry, afraid I'd refuse to listen, afraid the conversation would become something loud and irreparable. She said she had built something with Carter before she fully understood what she was doing, and by the time she did understand it, she was already in too deep to walk it back without consequence. She said she was sorry. She said it more than once, each time slightly differently, as if she was trying to find the version of the apology that would land correctly. I listened to all of it without interrupting, without raising my voice, without accusing, without asking the small, mean questions that would have been easy to ask and that wouldn't have told me anything I didn't already know. Because I had decided, weeks earlier, that if this conversation ever happened, I was going to let her say everything she needed to say. Not to be forgiving, not to be noble, but because I had given 2 years of my life to this person and I deserved to hear the truth told to my face. Not in captions, not in comments, not through mutual friends who tiptoed around what they knew. From her, directly. When she finished, I sat quietly for a moment. Then I said, "I appreciate you telling me, but I need you to understand something." She looked at me. I said, "The problem isn't that you were unhappy. People get unhappy. Relationships hit walls. That's real, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The problem is that instead of saying any of that to me, instead of giving us a chance to figure it out, or at least giving me the respect of an honest ending, you spent months building a second life and letting me believe I was in a real relationship. You posted a photo designed to be seen by people who know us both. You captioned it 'Real Happiness' while we were still together. You let me wake up next to you for months while you were introducing someone else as your boyfriend. And the only reason you're sitting across from me having this conversation right now is because the internet asked questions you couldn't answer." She didn't say anything. I said, "That's not confusion. That's not fear. That's a long series of choices made on purpose, every single day, for months." Silence. The kind that settles like weight. I said, "We're done." I moved out over the following week. Felix had already, without much discussion, made his spare room available. There was no scene, no screaming matches, no dramatic final confrontation in the doorway. I packed what was mine, organized what I was leaving, and moved efficiently. Celeste watched the process with the expression of someone who has finally arrived at a consequence they had been avoiding for months and finds that it looks exactly like they feared. On the last evening, as I was picking up my final bag, she asked, "Do you hate me?" I considered the honest answer. I said, "No. I think I'm just sad for the version of you I thought I knew." She started to cry. I picked up my bag. I closed the door. In the 3rd week of November, the original post disappeared. Gone. The "This is what real happiness looks like" photo, the image that had started all of this, deleted without announcement. Then several others. Workshop photos with ambiguous location tags. A few pictures she had posted during the summer. Gone. Then her account went private. Then quiet for almost 3 weeks. People noticed. Of course they did. Screenshots had already been taken and distributed across multiple platforms weeks earlier. Bex's group photo, the one with Carter clearly visible at Celeste's side, was already in circulation. The original caption had already been quoted, referenced, and dissected in comment threads that had nothing to do with her account. You cannot delete what has already been archived. You can only remove your own access to it. Every deletion she made was, paradoxically, more confirmation. Because people who haven't done anything wrong don't quietly purge their online history in the middle of the night. About a month after I moved out, Bex sent me a direct message. I had never spoken to her before this moment. It said, "I just want you to know that I'm sorry for my comment on her post." I didn't think about how that would land. I didn't have the full picture. I sat with that for a day. Then I wrote back, "You don't need to apologize. Your comment actually gave me information I needed. You did more than you know." She replied, "Wow." Then, she told people you two were basically already separated, that you had been for months. I said, "I know." She said, "For what it's worth, Carter knew about you from pretty much the beginning." I said, "That's between them." She said, "You're taking this really well." I said, "I'm working on it." There was a pause. Then she said, "I hope you actually are okay. Not just saying it." I said, "Some days more than others." She replied with a simple, "Fair." And that was the end of it. I need to tell you about a moment that happened about 6 weeks after I moved out. Not because it's dramatic, because it was the opposite of dramatic. It was a Saturday morning. I was at a small coffee shop near Felix's apartment, working on something, nothing important. A slow song came on through the speakers, something I couldn't identify, something mellow and unhurried. And without warning, the weight of everything just arrived. Not like a wave, more like weather, present all at once and everywhere at the same time. The full grief of it. Not the betrayal specifically, not the anger, not even the image of the photo or the sound of that caption in my head. Just the loss. 2 years. 2 years of something that had been, at least in the beginning, at least in parts, genuinely real. Mornings, dinner conversations, shared jokes that existed only between the two of us. The specific sound of her laughing at something in the next room. The feeling of being known by someone. All of it gone. Not slowly eroded. Gone in the moment I put my phone face down on a desk and started keeping a list. I sat with that feeling for about 5 minutes. I didn't fight it. I didn't try to think my way out of it or reframe it or remind myself of all the reasons I was better off. I just let it be there. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't respond well to being argued with. It responds better to being witnessed. So I witnessed it. And when the song ended and another one started and the feeling didn't lift but softened slightly around the edges, I closed my laptop. Ordered another coffee, pulled my chair closer to the window, watched people walk past on the street outside. Ordinary people in ordinary coats with ordinary destinations on an ordinary Saturday. And I thought, I'm going to be okay. Not fixed, not healed, not back to where I was before any of this happened. But okay, pointed in the right direction. And that was enough. That was completely enough to keep going. Carter and Celeste lasted until February. I only know that because Felix told me when I asked. I asked once. I asked because I needed to close the loop in my own head and stop it from running background calculations I didn't want. The answer gave me permission to stop thinking about it. That was all I needed it for. About 2 months after I moved out, I ran into Celeste at a supermarket. Completely accidental. I was in the bread aisle, distracted, trying to remember if I needed flour. She came around the corner. We both stopped. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. She looked the same, slightly tired around the eyes. She said, "Hey." I said, "Hey." She said, "How are you?" I said, "Good. You?" She said, "Okay." I put a loaf of bread in my basket. I walked toward the checkout. That was it. No moment. No confrontation. No scene. No closure speech. Just two people who used to mean something to each other, passing through the same aisle like strangers. That night, back in my apartment, my own apartment now, a 1-bedroom I had found 2 months earlier, I sat at my desk and thought about the caption for a long time. This is what real happiness looks like. I thought about all the different weights that sentence can carry, depending on who says it, depending on when, depending on what they're trying to convince and who they're trying to convince it to. Because sometimes people say this is real happiness to announce joy, and sometimes they say it to argue against something, to compare, to win a version of a conversation that the other person doesn't even know is happening. Celeste had said it at midnight, to an audience, in a public space, while I was still at my desk, working, completely unaware that I was being held up as the implicit contrast. The real in real happiness was doing a lot of work. It was saying, what I had before wasn't this. What I had before wasn't real. And she needed people to see that. Needed it badly enough to post at midnight. Needed it badly enough to caption it that way. Needed the validation of the comments and the likes, and the "you deserve this," and the "finally," before she had actually figured out whether any of it was true. She deleted everything, but she couldn't delete the fact that I saw it. She couldn't delete the 2 months of watching that followed. She couldn't delete the conversation that happened at the kitchen table. She couldn't delete what she told me, finally, with her coat still on and her hands folded and no more architecture left to hide behind. And she couldn't delete what I already knew, because I had built my understanding of events not from a single notification, but from months of careful, quiet attention. That's not something you can screenshot or erase. I'm writing this now from the desk by the east-facing window of my apartment. It's still fairly new, small, not fully furnished, but mine. In the mornings, the light comes through that window at an angle that changes every week as the season moves. And every morning I sit in it for a few minutes before I start the day, not thinking about anything specific, just sitting in the light, being in a place that belongs to me, living a life that doesn't need a caption. I want to tell you something about what the silence cost me, because I don't want to make it sound like I floated through those months untouched. I didn't. There were nights, in that period between seeing the post and moving out, when I lay beside her and felt like a stranger in my own life. When I looked at the ceiling of an apartment we shared and thought, this is not real. Not the apartment, not the ceiling, but the situation. The performance of normalcy over a foundation I already knew was hollow. There's a particular kind of loneliness in knowing the truth about your situation before you've decided what to do about it. You can't talk to the person next to you. You can't pretend it isn't happening. You can't fully grieve it yet because the thing you're grieving is technically still alive. You just exist in this suspended state, awake in the dark, aware of everything, unable to name any of it out loud. I think that was the hardest part. Not the betrayal, the suspension, the weeks of living inside a reality I couldn't acknowledge without triggering the very thing I was still trying to understand. And I want to tell you something else. Something I rarely admit, even to myself. There were moments when I almost said something, almost broke the silence, almost walked into the kitchen and laid everything on the table before I was ready. Not because I was angry, but because carrying the weight of what I knew, alone, without being able to put it down anywhere, is its own kind of exhaustion. One night, about 3 weeks before the kitchen table conversation, I was sitting on the couch at midnight after she had already gone to bed. The apartment was quiet, and I sat there with my phone in my hand, looking at the notes I had been keeping, the dates, the names, the timeline of a second life built quietly beside mine. And I thought, I could just end this right now. I could walk into the bedroom. I could wake her up. I could say, I know everything. And this would be over in an hour. I sat there for a long time with that option in my hands. And then I put my phone face down. Again, the same gesture I had made the first night. Because I wasn't ready yet. Not because I needed more evidence. But because ending it that night, at midnight, with raw emotion and a racing heart and weeks of held silence suddenly flooding out, that wasn't the ending I wanted. I wanted to end it from the same place I had observed from. Calmly. Completely. With full understanding. So I waited 3 more weeks. And when the conversation finally happened, it happened the way I had needed it to. Not as an explosion. As a door closing. Quietly. Firmly. Without drama. After I moved out and the weeks passed and the deletions began and Carter and Celeste collapsed by February, the mutual friend network eventually moved on. The tagging stopped. The comment threads went dead. The screenshots faded into old phone galleries. The story, as far as the internet was concerned, concluded. And I think that's the part that's hardest to communicate about all of this. Because the internet version of a story like this has a shape. It has a villain. It has a wrong party. It has receipts. It has the deletion as confirmation. It has the satisfying arc of, person did wrong, person was exposed, person deleted the evidence, person faced consequences. Clean. Definitive. Shareable. But the real version, the one I actually lived, doesn't have those clean edges. The real version has grief sitting next to clarity, love sitting next to loss. 2 years of something real next to 2 years of something that became something else. The real version has me in a coffee shop on a Saturday, feeling everything, and then going back to work. The real version has me running into her in a supermarket aisle and saying, hey, and walking away. The real version doesn't resolve dramatically. It just continues. one day at a time, in an apartment with an east-facing window, in morning light that changes every week, living quietly without any need to announce it. She needed the world to see her happiness before she was sure it was real. I don't. And that difference, that quiet, steady difference, is the thing I keep coming back to. Not with anger, not even with sadness anymore. Just recognition. She posted a caption. She deleted a caption. She thought the story was about what she wanted people to see. But the story was always about what she couldn't hide. And silence, it turns out, sees everything. Some people announce their happiness. Some people just live it. The difference is everything.